Welcome to Questions in Finance,
a podcast where we translate academic mumbo-jumbo to answer interesting questions in finance. I'm Kate Holland.
And I'm Veljko Fotak. Kate and I met when we were PhD students at the University of Oklahoma.
Today, we're university professors, and we spend our days teaching and researching companies, markets, and all things related.
Hello, Katerina.
Hi, Veljko.
And hello, Bill.
Hey, Veljko and Kate. How are you guys?
Hi. Welcome back to our show.
Good to be back. It's always fun.
Today, we tackle a big topic, geopolitics. And we are living in extremely exciting times. We have physical wars in the Ukraine and the Middle East. We have trade wars shaking the world. We are all still recovering from a pandemic, the investment in AI that might revolutionize the world. So how does one make sense of all of this and how it's going to impact our financial markets? Today, to talk about this topic, we have a big expert, Bill Megginson.
Bill is a professor and prize chair in finance at the University of Oklahoma, and he is a researcher on privatization, government ownership. He is well known in that field. His new work covers space exploration, and we've had him on the podcast to talk about that. He is also a consulting editor at the Journal of International Business Studies. He's also a visiting professor at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. We're glad to have Bill back. As we've mentioned, he has been our advisor, co-author, and a dear friend.
Thank you, Kate. I should also mention for your lead-in of what's going on in the world, 5 words I never thought I'd actually hear, which is peace in the Middle East. This is actually an extraordinary event. I visited Israel right after the Six-Day War in 1967, and I've been to the Muslim parts of the Middle East many times. And I never thought I would hear those 5 words. And realistically, if you see the images coming out, this is extraordinary.
We are obviously all enthusiastic about it, and yet, is it going to last, Bill?
As we'll probably get into it, the main bad actor in the Middle East, Iran, has been completely neutered. Everybody, the serious money and political power in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf states are solidly behind this. Egypt is behind this. Basically, this peace was done in spite of and to eliminate Hamas, which will be, again, there's going to be a residue of that. But yeah, there is so much momentum behind this, and the prestige of I don't want to come across as a MAGA person. I'm not. But certainly the prestige of the United States and Trump is truly extraordinary. Yeah, this is going to have very big impact on the Middle East and in terms of the global balance of influence, balance of power.
I think when it comes to wars, and I'm from Ukraine, my stance is until you see it, it's very hard to believe there's going to be permanent peace. There's always a lot of talks, there's always a lot of negotiations, there's more people killed in the meanwhile sometimes. So I think oftentimes for me, until I see global action, specifically it's having foreign troops on the ground, whether NATO, whether US troops, in all areas of conflict, I don't believe that there's going to be permanent peace. So as long as there are no foreign troops, I don't believe in sustained peace in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Afghanistan.
We will certainly see. Certainly the Middle East does not need troops. Israel is militarily almost omnipotent now. I've never seen this kind of just raw military power and supremacy that Israel has there. In Ukraine, again, we'll probably talk to this later, but if you mean foreign by U.S., that's not going to happen. The U.S. is involved with Ukraine, and I'm not forecasting imminent peace in Ukraine. I hope it happens, but Ukraine has the strongest army, actually, really outside the United States and Israel.
This is a makeshift effort, right? Because there was no army until a few years ago, until it was attacked, and they've came back to fulfill the need.
It's an extraordinary example of what can be done. As a Ukrainian, you should be very proud. A former Ukrainian, I know you're American citizen.
I am, thank you, yes.
I hesitate to use the term Ukraine is winning, but pretty close. Right? It's certainly no longer losing, and time is on the Ukrainian side, and we'll see. Again, one of the things about power and prestige is it builds. Failures build, but also successes build. And if Trump actually turns his attention to Ukraine, puts pressure.
Right.
The thing is that the guy on the other side is just nuts and cornered.
Putin has his own mind. I agree there. My hopes are all there, but I'm going to believe it when I see it and see the first foreign troops on the ground.
As we get started, I just want to contextualize two things for our listeners. The first one is that you're probably going to be listening to this in a week or two because we are not fast as editors, but we are recording this on the 13th of October, 2025. Dates matter because it does feel like somebody has put the pedal to the metal, right? History is just accelerated.
This talk on geopolitics, I gave that October 1st, and already events have passed it by, particularly regarding the Middle East and Israel, but also China.
We should probably mention, which talk is this, Bill? You gave this at George Washington University, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, it was George Washington University.
Bill presented his 9 most glaring issues that are right now staring at us in the geopolitics space. And we wanted him to detail those 9 to 10 points as key geopolitical developments occurring right now globally. That's our podcast today.
And I will also just add, Bill has visited, taught, and worked in over 85 countries in his lifetime. He has lived in Spain, Pakistan, France, Saudi Arabia, the United States. We cannot think of a better person to talk about the big picture around the world. Bill and I don't always agree, but I've always greatly enjoyed getting a different perspective, and I've always learned a lot. And so I certainly look forward to Bill telling us his opinion.
That's probably the best thing we can offer our listeners, an honest discussion where 2 viewpoints that don't agree can talk about it. Some things that has been happening in the US, as we've seen with the rise of polarization, 2 sides are not talking to each other. So the ability to talk to each other unites us. And I think that's great.
We probably agree on more than we disagree. Bill, we'll let you roll.
Yeah, that's true. We certainly do. And Veljko, you mentioned, thank you for the introduction. You're right. Actually, it's after this summer, I'm up to 87 countries. But just a little background. My worldview was formed when I was 13 to 15 years old. I was living in Karachi, Pakistan with my folks during the Vietnam War. And it was then in an international school in the Vietnam War as an American, watching it from the outside. That's where my worldview really formed. I've always loved history, but that's within the framework of, I'd lived in Spain before that, but it's as an adolescent to watch this happening, it was extraordinary. And that's where much of the way that I look at the world comes from, that perspective, being an American overseas at a time of just absolute turmoil, but also the enduring power of Western civilization, Western civilization, but especially within that American civilization, that has always shaped my views, always shaped the way that I look at the world. But I also try to be a scientist. I try to look at it dispassionately and also see all of the warts and all of the weaknesses of American power and Western civilization. The West has been winning for 500 years, and it's going to continue winning in the global contest of ideas and arms if it comes to it, and finance. We're now at the situation where the total value of stocks of the world exceeds world GDP, $130 trillion. World GDP is 105. AI, which is one of the topics that I had, is consuming. It makes it sound bad. It's mostly very good. Is you're having a capital expenditure surge, both in the U.S. and China, but especially in the United States. You have $100 billion investments, $10 billion investments almost every other day. Broadcom and OpenAI, this is not intangible possible demand. This is an insatiable demand for chips.
Definitely for the energy sector in the US, huge demand.
And what that's going to mean for electricity demand, electricity consumption and power, which I think all of this is basically good, but as with everything in economics, there's a cost to it.
I was just going to say, Bill, would you like to go in the order roughly?
Let me just foreshadow the 9 things. There are 4 geopolitical events or forces that are having immediate impact. It turns out AI is not one of those.
It's interesting you're saying AI is not one of those. So we have polled the youth, so to say. Of course, it's not a representative sample. There's some of the younger people that Veljko and I have surveyed about what do they think. This is population of 19 to 24-year-olds here in the US. What do they think are the biggest geopolitical shifts that the US is facing now? And AI is not one of those. as well, not in their list.
Is TikTok one of them?
TikTok is not one of them either.
Okay, that's surprising. But for my daughter, TikTok is the beginning and end of the world. And that's not even one of the ones on my list either.
I'll mention the list later because it actually has a lot of overlap with what you're mentioning. Has a few things that are not there.
The one I started with was tariffs.
Number one
is
the biggest influence.
Tariff regime is fundamentally different. And if you know anything about American history, you realize just how dramatically changed this is from historical pattern and the way that America's always, or the world has really conducted trade policy. Since World War II, it's been essentially an American-led steady reduction in tariffs, steady integration of global trade, steady growth until the global financial crisis, 2008. World trade, merchandise and service trade, was growing faster than any of the underlying economies. So if you look at it as a percent of GDP, trade was going up steadily until 2008. Again, the global financial crisis. Now, absolute value of world trade and unit volume has continued to grow since we recovered from the global financial crisis 2010. But as a percent of GDP, it has gone down. Peaked at about 53%, it's now 44%. So world trade has endured, but it wasn't particularly healthy even before Trump's tariff regime came about. And of course, the U.S. was very much on the losing end of this. Very large trade deficits, a sizable service surplus, but a large trade deficit, whereas China has been running a $1 trillion merchandise trade surplus with the rest of the world for several years now, or at least 2 or 3 years.
It might be a surprise to a lot of our listeners, but U.S. is actually an extremely internal economy. So U.S. produces and consumes a lot of things internally, and a lot more than other countries, which may surprise others because everything we wear is made in China, most of the things. I'm just joking, but in terms of actual food, other goods that we produce and consume, that's done internally. The U.S. is an outlier in terms of how much is done within the country.
You're absolutely right, Kate. The U.S. is overwhelming a domestic economy. 80% is domestic consumption and production. So is China. China's overwhelmingly a domestic economy.
Which is another surprise.
The US.
If you think about it the other way, given everything that we were here is, as I'm jokingly saying, made in China, that's also a mind-blowing statement that China is very internal economy, just like the US, given how much they sell outside.
They're by far the world's largest importer of oil, almost all commodities.
Right.
Intermediate goods, airplanes. We think of China as this manufacturing powerhouse, and of course they are. They've been the number one manufacturing country in the world for over a decade, the largest exporter for over a decade. But they have no raw materials, very few.
Except for the
rare earths. The U.S. has more rare earth deposits, mineral deposits.
Right.
But China, at the tremendous environmental and health cost, has allowed and promoted the mining and refining of rare earth metals. They're not really rare. They're all over the world.
Correct.
Nobody can refine them other than China. Both China and the U.S. are overwhelmingly domestic economies. We are decoupling. Only 3% of China's GDP is exports to the U.S., and it's been going down steadily.
And I guess why we're talking so much about U.S. and China is because a very large tariff is being put on China. And tariff is the number one geopolitical shift Bill is talking about.
And it's also part of number 3. What the tariff is doing with China is important. What it's doing in Canada is potentially transformative. It is having a much bigger impact on Canada than on any other country. But again, back to what's so different about this tariff regime. Before Trump, the average tariffs on U.S. imports was about 3%, which was consistent, a little bit below, but consistent with most of the rest of the developed world. It's now 17% and highly variable. It looks like we may be settling into something of an equilibrium, but it's going to be an equilibrium above 10%. Right. We are in a tariff regime, and this is going to last. And this is something that has not been the case since World War II. Right? Before that, we had tariffs. The United States was built behind a tariff wall. Nobody wants to talk about that. But throughout the 1800s, the U.S. became the world's largest economy in 1870. They didn't start reducing tariffs till about 1920. It's not like we've never done this before.
I have been reading a lot about the history of tariffs now, for obvious reasons. And I genuinely did not know that up to 1913, the federal government was financed virtually entirely through tariffs.
It was the biggest source of revenue until there was a constitutional amendment allowing an income tax. We had to do that. Tried income taxes many times before. It was always been ruled illegal. After that, from 1913 on, the income tax became the most important. It didn't really become that important until World War II. We didn't have a withholding tax until 1943. Before that, less than 1% of the population paid income tax. Things have transformed throughout the early part of American history up to World War I, in the early 20th century. Tariffs were the biggest source of revenue for the federal government. And it became a manufacturing powerhouse, which of course it still is, a dominant economic powerhouse behind a tariff wall. And the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, economists have cried as horrific in 1933. Basically now we're back at the same level of tariffs, overall tariffs, that they were in Smoot-Hawley, or just almost that level. And yet it has not had devastating impact yet.
I feel like it's a good place to jump in and actually list the 5 top trends we got from the use, because 2 of the things we talked about are reflected in there. So I'm just going to quickly do the 5-point list.
You should, yes.
They did mention tariffs in their very first point too. So the first points coincide, except for the way that it was presented is more from America as isolationism is the way that it was described. America's isolationism through higher tariffs, through also changes in the military globally, and leadership. Number 2 was China, which we just talked about, and its quiet effort to replace what US was. Number 3 was the global turning of backs to Israel. Number 4 was more instability and not market instability, things like wars that are happening right now. And number 5 was climate migration. So the first 2 were very much along the lines of what we're talking about right now.
And the last one was my second point, was climate. Actually.
Climate migration. Oh.
Yeah, and you have a very sophisticated group of teenagers. Not sure about the ones I would talk to here would be quite that savvy about what's going on in the world. It's a pretty good list, actually. America withdrawing from the world. This is not happening. But America as big brother is definitely happening. Basically, Europe is being slapped in the face and said, stand up and be an adult, which is probably needed, but that's a shock to the system to see that. Certainly walking away from the Paris Accords, which are defunct.
So we're talking about the second point, right? We're shifting into the second big geopolitical shift right now, climate change.
Climate change, and whether this is still the fundamental imperative of Western civilization is to reduce carbon, CO2 emissions, and the answer is no. Now, this is past. People don't quite realize just how yesterday's news this is. The UN is having its annual meeting on climate change, and nobody's there. Almost no major world leader is going. Would they even know where it is? It's in Brazil, but nobody's attending.
The fact that the United States, to a large extent, has decreased its commitment to net zero or turned away from it is certainly a huge loss to the international coalition. But I'm not sure the rest of the world is following US leadership into abandoning the concern for green energy. There was a UN Climate Summit in September 2025. 100 countries were present there that account for 72% of global emissions. I looked at a survey. Out of 4,083 companies surveyed, 1,935 have climate and emission targets.
Which they're walking away from.
One thing to add, I think in the US also quietly, the green energy isn't talked about, but if you look at the stats, it has been climbing actually against brown energy in the last 2 years, including this year as well.
Last year, there were $2.7 invested in green energy for every dollar invested in brown energy around the world. This year, the ratio is 4-1, green to brown.
And yet the world still consumes over 80% is fossil fuels of its energy.
Of course.
And it has not changed. I probably came across as a velociraptor on environment, and I don't mean to be. This is going to continue. There is an ongoing improving the environment. For what it's worth, the environment in the United States and the Western world today is so much better than it was. Silent Spring was 1965, Rachel Carson's book.
Right. Huge environmental book.
This touched it off. And the West, the US, Europe, Japan, she wouldn't even recognize how much better it is now. In China, it's a mess. For all the talk, they're the number one producer of wind and solar. They also, by far, the number one polluter in terms of coal, and they're building far more coal plants than the rest of the world put together.
CO2 emissions are through the roof.
And this is not going to change. With the rest of the world, can the US go alone and be ignored? No, for a number of reasons. One of them, the cost of energy to industry in the United States is 1/4 what it is in Germany. And it's getting worse in Germany. It's getting better in the US. This can't endure. In a globally competitive economy, you can't have China essentially going its own way on energy, the US turning its back literally on the Paris Accords. The U.S. is still going to be pursuing environmental protection. It always has. Since 1970, it has. It will continue to do so. There will be a large investment in renewable. The renewable share is stable or slightly increasing, but this is going to be increasing in a total energy demand in the world that is increasing far faster. The share of energy produced by fossil fuels, if it drops at all, it's going to drop incrementally and very slowly over time. Now, that has to be mitigated, but it's not going to net zero. There's just no chance that this is going to happen. What is destroying Canada? Why is Alberta trying to withdraw from Canada? Essentially, it's all having to do with climate policy.
Are we shifting to the third point? What is the third big geopolitical shift here? We've talked about tariffs, climate.
Third, we may be on the cusp of fundamental political change in three very important countries. China's one, right. Canada's second, Russia's third. I left out Israel. That's in many ways even more. But in terms of fundamental non-traditional change, the premier of China is probably in a hospital recovering from a stroke. He may lose all of his titles, certainly some of his titles, at this upcoming plenum in a week. The position of Xi Jinping versus...
So I have to jump in and show my complete ignorance because I have not heard anything about Xi Jinping being in the hospital. So that's news to me. But
had a stroke last year. You won't hear this from the party news, but yeah, there's very good, and there's actually pictures, but there's very good accounts that he probably has had another stroke. He certainly had some kind of a medical event. So
the health of party officials is so evasive and difficult. I'm going to just bring up a few anecdotes. If you think about Vladimir Putin, for example, he's well known for his plastic surgeries. Nobody knows when they happen, how they happen, when he uses a double. We also know that President Trump currently is suffering with some health issues. Information is not going to be revealed with what and how. We've known that Margaret Thatcher as well, back in the day, has had her share of issues that have led when she stepped down from the post developed in dementia. But presidential leaders and just political leaders in general, I think as all humans, have this way of hiding their health concerns. And you never know what's going on in reality. I agree there.
Joe Biden has stage 4 prostate cancer. If
Yes.
reelected, you'd have a dying president. John Kennedy was crippled. He hit it well, but he was fundamentally... Yeah, but for what it's worth, Trump got a clean bill of health today. He's 78 years old. He doesn't have a very good diet. True. But Xi Jinping, from all appearances, certainly if he's not actually in the hospital, he has had a medical event of some type. He's certainly not in political good health. All of his key people, most of his key people, particularly on the military side, have been replaced. It's a death struggle in many ways that's going on. We don't know because it's not an open society.
I'm fascinated by some of what you're saying about China because I've been reading some of the recent events, especially the military purges. I've heard analysis that interprets this as a sign of power by Xi Jinping, and I've heard analysis that interprets it as a sign of weakness and perhaps you're purging the military because you're worried.
His people are being purged. The people he put in place over the last year and a half have been removed. It was Mao who said power flows from the point of a gun. That I don't think it's going to come to that, but we don't know. He may emerge politically intact. It could happen. It's more likely that he's going to be weakened, if not actually replaced. I hope he's replaced. The guy is a threat to world peace, a bad actor.
Does a weaker leadership in China bode well or ill for Taiwan and for the chip industry?
Get this guy out. Any rational policy in the best interest of China would not be pursuing warrior diplomacy and threatening to attack Taiwan.
So I'm going to bring us back to the third point, all of the three countries here, I think that it's very hard to know what is going to happen to the health of all political figures in the world overall. But it's interesting. We are guessing on a lot. Their health is always in question. We don't know what's going on with them. So let's go back to China, Canada, Russia, our big third geopolitical stage.
Even if Xi Jinping is not ill, not in the hospital, it's still everything else I said is there's a very good chance he's going to lose power, even if he did not have a stroke. This is, and I hope not that the man dies, just that he's out of power. He's a very bad actor, as is Vladimir Putin. The world would be better off without these two guys in power. On the other hand, everything that's happening in Canada is happening in wide open. It's a democracy. We know exactly what's going on. Essentially, what's happening is the revolt of Alberta. It's where most of Canada's oil is, and the dirtiest oil. But again, it's why Canada is a fossil fuel energy power. All the pipelines go through Alberta. Yet Ottawa, the East, Canada's ruled by the East elites and the West Coast, kind of like New York and California setting the policy for the U.S. This happens in Canada. And they're tired of it in Alberta. Then, of course, the Liberals won this last election on an anti-Trump ticket. But that was the final straw. And essentially, Alberta is landlocked, so it has to use pipelines to get the oil out. And they've all been vetoed by Ottawa, by the central government, or by the British Columbia government. So basically, you have a premier there, Daniel Smith, who's essentially said, we're going to make our own deals, right? Now, the pipelines she basically has already negotiated pipelines to the U.S. without the approval of Ottawa, with all the capital there's plenty of capital to do this. There's political will. So now they actually have a scheduled, not a secession vote. Yeah, and in a way, it will be a secession vote. They've passed the numbers to have a legally binding discussion for separation from Canada. What's different now, of course, one, Alberta's finally said, this is enough. We've supplied the vast bulk of the revenues, more of our tax revenues to Ottawa. Then we get back. They veto all our pipelines, our energy, and there's sentiment for that. What's different now is America is willing to welcome them in, even if it's not as a 51st state. Daniel Smith, the 101st U.S. Senator. I can easily imagine both of those happening. Even if it just became a part of the Canadian Federation that could contract directly with the U.S., they just struck an energy deal with Germany. So they could be on their own. They would be the fourth largest energy producer in the world, just the region of Alberta. And all of this traces back to climate policy. To make Canada reduce emissions, they're cutting off development of Alberta's most important resource. So energy and climate policy impacting here as well as more obvious areas.
I'm going to jump in with, as usual, an anecdote. So I have several friends living in Alberta and several of friends' kids going to school in Alberta. And they all say that it's very different. It's more public goods-oriented areas in terms of healthcare, in terms of people's views. So while Alberta is talking about it, it seems like still the majority of their population lives on universal healthcare and use it and also have a mindset that kind of goes back to it. So I'm not sure what they're thinking. Number two, a little less light is an issue because, first of all, U.S. already processes some of Canada's heavy sands as is. And right now, especially if there's going to be Canadian oil coming in, it's going to be competing with a huge production that's happening in North Dakota and the Bakken oil fields, which have been newly developed in the last 2 to 7 years. Let's go bigger, about 10 years ago. That creates an issue for the U.S. because Bakken oil is cleaner, sweeter, is a lot easier to process. Canada might be at a difficult spot. Alberta, not Canada. Alberta, we're talking about Alberta. Anecdotal evidence from my friends and their kids. They have a very different idea of what life is than what we have in the U.S. And two, in terms of the U.S. oil industry, I also am not sure how much pushback will come from Bakken producers. They have better oil and don't need the competition.
The quick answer, will it compete with Bakken and fracked oil? No, it won't compete at all. There's a greater demand for heavy oil. I was a petroleum chemist in an earlier life.
Right.
I worked in a refinery for 3 years, which processed all different types of crude oil. Oil refineries are not general purpose assets. They are optimized to a certain thing. Most U.S. refineries are optimized for heavier crudes, which is what comes from Canada. Almost by definition, a fracked, which is what Bakken is, which is the Permian Basin, is a much lighter, you're right, it's much lighter, sweeter, less sulfur crude oil, but it's not what refineries are optimized to. The demand for Canadian crude would not be in Montana and North Dakota. It'd be in Louisiana, Texas, the Gulf Coast. So no, there would be no pushback. There would be welcomed. It would not be competition. U.S. is now an oil exporter. It's not
of
quite
course,
net exporter, but exporting several million barrels a day.
Meeting their own demand now, but still exporting and importing some.
We're still a net importer of petroleum products, but just barely. Net exporter of natural gas, hugely. We're the number one producer
for LNG.
and that's going to continue to go up. There would be no problem with demand for the oil. The rest of the world would much rather buy Canadian oil than Iranian or Persian Gulf oil. The geopolitics and economics fundamentally favor Alberta being able to produce and export to the world. What's keeping them back is the climate policies of the Canadian federal government. This is what's driving this push. They're Canadians. They're not Americans. This would be a very hard thing for them to do. Scotland, independence failed. Quebec, independence failed. Fundamentally, these people, they don't want to become Americans unless they're absolutely pushed to it. They don't have to. There's 4 basic outcomes that could happen with Canada. First, the votes fail for independence. There's some kind of a reconciliation, but basically, Canada stays intact and the central government remains sovereign.
Most likely outcome.
It's possible, but I don't think it's likely. The second one is there's a vote for more freedom and you get something short of absolute withdrawal from Canada, but much greater freedom to maneuver, make your own agreements, Albertan control over the way taxes are spent.
So kind of like Quebec?
So essentially, much more autonomy for Alberta within Canada. That's 2. Third, they have a secession vote and become an independent or quasi-independent entity of some shape, but not quite, which is number 4 is they withdraw, they become the 51st, Saskatchewan becomes the 52nd state of the U.S. Those are 4. I'm not sure they're equal probabilities, but it's going to change.
We will see what time shows for Canada, right? What happens in the 4 is going to be the next few years are going to show that for sure. Mm-hmm. But I think that at least at my simplistic view of the world, these issues with Canada are on a different scale compared to what we're talking about here, China and Russia. So I'm going to bring us back to the third part of the third point, which was Russia. If China and Russia get together, that's a major superpower with a lot of land, trade links, and oil from Russia. Let's get back to the point. We've talked about China, Canada. The third one you mentioned was Russia. So I think that those 2, China and Russia, are on a much bigger geopolitical risk or shift than Canada.
Canada's a bigger deal, but I take your point. China and Russia are not, they're natural enemies. Right? They have fought many wars. They're competing over Siberia. They always have. They're competing over Manchuria. Now, these are not natural allies.
Well, I mean, Russian oil and
China's buying at a huge discount.
At a huge discount, large quantities, sales is P times Q. Money coming in terms of dollars or Russian rubles exchange is huge between the 2. That's one. Then there's the wood industry. Big parts of Siberia taiga is being chopped up to provide wood to China quietly to gain political favors with China, just as China is doing with the BRI project and building infrastructure in the rest of the world.
Which is not working. There's very little actual trade between China and Russia, far greater between the U.S. and China. Russia exports oil and India and China buy it at a huge discount. It's not clear they're making any money on the net price after producing and shipping it. It's at risk.
They're making enough money to support the war.
This is one of the things that Chinese banks are increasingly unwilling to do with Russia because they fear sanctions. They talk about natural gas, but natural gas requires a pipeline. Yeah, they signed a deal to have a pipeline, another pipeline between China and Russia, but it's 7 years in the future at least.
Right.
Russia will have to pay for it. It's false. They have not provided any military support to Russia, some dual-use stuff. But if you look at it in an objective sense, China's a lousy ally. They have done very little to support Russians' war, and it's hardly in their interest for Russia to continue a war that is now stalemated or losing, even if they had won, which they're not going to. Now, China and Russia are not natural allies, and they're both basically trying to figure out a way to live, or certainly China's trying to figure out a way to disengage and keep the damage between Russia and the West.
I understand your perspective, but You earlier were talking about American prestige increasing. And, that's exactly where I worry a little bit. You talk about Russia and China not being natural allies, but I think some actions the United States is taking right now with the trade war is pushing these non-natural allies into each other's hands. And I think that's where you and I might differ on the outcomes of this trade war.
80 years ago, Russia and China were America's allies against Germany and Japan. Things change, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
And in 2020, Russia's current account balance was positive, and it was at 2.4% of GDP. Last year, it was over 9% of GDP positive. This year, it's fallen down again to around 3%.
I would have to see those numbers. That seems very wrong.
Those are World Bank numbers. That's the World Bank statistics.
If that is, it's only because imports have collapsed. And that could be. There is a balance. It's because nobody's selling them anything.
Let me translate this to our listeners. I think the point that Veljko is trying to make with the balance numbers is that basically, if you look at some statistics from World Bank, it seems like Russia's economy is doing better this year.
We're not talking about the economy in an aggregate, just exports. The current account balance is now higher than it was in 2020. What this seems to suggest is that Russia is exporting more than it's importing right now, and the gap right now, after 4 or 5 years of war, is larger than at the beginning. If you buy the idea that a positive current account balance, a surplus, is a good thing, it might have a positive impact on your economy, jobs.
I see. So they are exporting oil and some fertilizers and wood, I guess, potash. The imports that they're bringing in, as Bill is suggesting, could have actually collapsed and been collapsing for a while. They're able to bring less from the outside.
The point that Bill is making is that there are two ways you get a positive current account balance. One is your imports go down, one is your exports go up. So I was interpreting this as signaling that Russia is still selling a lot of oil. Bill is saying it could be coming from the other side of the equation.
I see.
They're selling less oil than they did in 2020. Well, 2021 is a banner year for Russia. If they'd stayed on that course, they could be a middle-income European country. But they waged this stupid war, and now it's coming back to completely devastate their economy. Yeah, they've been cut off from almost all imports. They're exporting less oil than they did in 2021, far less oil, no natural gas, very little natural gas. And they're doing it at a discount. The problem, there's a merchandise trade surplus. If it is, I'd have to see those numbers. Their economy is so distorted, completely militarized. It's 7% of GDP, 40% military, is 40% of government spending. They have the Dutch disease. One industry is doing really well, sucking in everything from others. That's certainly happening in Russia. They have 1 million casualties of their military, but each one of those is a huge payoff for the family.
If you talk to Russians in Russia, I cannot say they have felt the war at all. There's either a godlike following of Vladimir Putin, or if you don't agree, you don't say anything because there's people with automatic weapons that show up by your door, or perhaps poison you even quieter, or kill you in some other way. Besides that, if you talk to a regular person, people who are pensioners there are going to museums, they buy their produce, they have their apartment. So the common folks, so to say, the middle class, they haven't felt the effect of the war quite as they should from common anecdotal evidence, conversations with people.
At the end of the day, from a purely fiscal point of view, and especially for your pension liabilities, losing 1 million people that they're not going to age and draw pensions from the state is actually a big stimulus.
Only on one side, because the people you're losing are the most productive.
They mostly drew them from prison, so I'm not sure.
That used to be, but they're basically getting it from the provinces. The people in St. Petersburg and Moscow are not yet hurting, although Ukrainian drones have taken out something like 20% of the refining capacity. They can now hit St. Petersburg and Moscow. They know there's a war. But again, you look at it, and it's hard to escape the conclusion this is a nation of serfs, right? These are Europeans. They should know what's going on. They have known an open society, and yet they are willing to go along with this. I don't have a lot of respect for Russian folks who take this that allows Putin to continue the war as long as he can. He's a monster and has continued it this long to devastating effect, but no gains.
Right.
This could continue as long as he has the money and he's able to squander a generation of young Russian men to do it.
What are your possibilities for Russia going forward?
Something's got to give in a year. Either there's got to be some kind of Russia somehow breaks through, or time is now on Ukraine's side. The perception is that you have this huge country and a small country, and that ultimately weight is going to win. And that's just simply not true. It hasn't happened so far. When you're losing 3 times as many of your own people than the opponent, this is not militarily sustainable. Ukraine now has the technological edge, producing drones and long-distance attack weapons at a rate no Western country is coming close to. They've essentially gotten around air defenses in Russia, so they can attack just about anything at will. Now, the perception is that Ukraine is running out of people. Certainly a lot of people have left Ukraine. But somebody made this point, it really resonated. In Ukraine, they dropped the draft age to 27. And every time I've heard that, it was 40. Don't you draft 18-year-olds? No, not unless you have to. Right? They have basically kept their young men as a population for the future, unless they volunteered. Fathers are going to the front so their sons don't have to. As a father, I understand why that would be possible. They don't need men. That would be better if they had them. But if they were desperate, they would drop that draft age to 18 and immediately create 500,000 new soldiers. They don't have to. The defensive war, they are sustainable, and they are being sustained by Western allies at an increasing pace with better weapons. Their economic situation is bad, but they are creating a military second to Israel and the United States, far better than Russia. So it's in many ways, and with the drones now and what they've actually been able to do with that, they're hurting Russia militarily, economically, psychologically. If Trump put real pressure on Russia, this guy is a monster. He's not going to stop unless he has to.
I agree. I'm not sure one can put pressure on this type of a person, but I would be happy to be proven wrong.
No, I understand. You're right. Why is he doing this? This is not rational. You have an image of yourself as a czar and you want to recreate greater Russia.
Okay, I'm going to keep us on track here. So we've got the third point more or less covered. Number 1 was, again, tariffs. Number 2, climate and global net emissions. Number 3, we talked about China, Canada, and Russia. Number 4, let's switch to point number 4.
Number 4 is Middle East. This is fundamentally different and better than it was October 1st. If you go back to 2023, way back 2 years ago, Iran was this menacing force encircling the Gulf, threatening Israel, Turkey, the Gulf. It is now spent. It is militarily neutered. Its security has been completely compromised by Israeli intelligence. Israel proved they can take over Iranian airspace militarily anytime they want. There is no defense. The U.S. has basically shown with a one-night strike that you can completely take out these hardened bunkers. You hear things, they still want to have nuclear weapons. They're still trying. Think that through. If you started rebuilding, what would happen? First, the scientists would be murdered. Then you would have a surgical attack, which would wipe anything out. There's no chance they can come back. Again, if they had a rational leader, you would abandon this fixation with destroying Israel, become a normal country, go back into the world of nations, have, if not a democracy, much more open society. But you have this, it's very hard to get dictators, authoritarian governments that are maniacs and ruthless dictators, which is what you have in Iran, to leave until they're very brittle, until they look very strong, until they crack.
I'm going to make 2 points. This is my anecdotal evidence, so to say. I have several friends who's gone on vacation to Iran, actually, and these are perhaps nowhere close to as well traveled as Bill, but they probably keep under 50 countries that they visited under their belt. And they have said that to several of them, Iran was the favorite destination. They really enjoyed the country and the hospitality of the people in Iran more than anywhere else. So that was one anecdotal thing. Another one just popped into my head is that Iran has hired Russian physicists to run their nuclear programs. I wonder how this relates to point number 3, with Russia being strained right now, and their physicists, they could export. Those are the 2 things that popped into my head as we are talking about Iran.
Yeah. I don't think that Israel has assassinated any of the, if there are, I have not heard that there's key Russian physicists. Certainly the top people are Iranian. This is a well-educated, advanced technological society. It used to be, at least. So they have a lot of talent. Israel has taken out at least 20 of the very top scientists, and a lot of the other after that. They've taken out generals. The U.S. took out the head of the Quds Force. There would be very little chance that they could rebuild that. Now, every American I know, or everybody who goes there as an American, this is very popular. Americans are popular in Iran. To no good so far. The Iranian population would love an opening, love to be rid of this regime, but they can't. I'm not surprised your friends found a very warm reception. One of my daughter's best friend is Iranian, goes back routinely. Yeah, but so what? As long as this regime's in power, it's a festering mass that damages nobody but itself. Mm-hmm. It used to be terribly threatening to the rest of the world.
I understand your assessment about how much Iran has been degraded. This may be a little bit controversial in some sense, right? Because we've heard there is this agreement right now between the United States side and the European side about how much has really been achieved in degrading Iran. And you mentioned some of the pushback Israel is getting, especially from Europe, partially from the United States, and how this weaker position for Israel indirectly strengthens Iran.
How stupid do the Europeans look now to recognize a Palestinian state just before a peace deal?
Well, Bill,
Europe is irrelevant.
We are just going to have to differ on that one.
What part of my analysis is incorrect? There's another piece of information I just heard last night. Their Shahed drones that they're selling to Russia. Ukraine has figured out a way they're very easy to hack. They figured out a way to basically take over these drones. Think about what this does to, one, Ukraine, two, to the Iranian export market for their weapons. What part of it is going to come back? They start rebuilding in the desert as soon as they get the first shovelful in. It will be destroyed. The people who are going to do it will be assassinated. They are owned by Israeli intelligence. And there's just nothing that they can. Who's going to support them? Yeah, I understand Europeans have a different perspective. I used to have respect for that. It's much less now. But
I will say, Bill, you asked me which part of your analysis do I not agree with. You are more optimistic than I am about the success of the peace plan in Israel. My understanding is that we had a plan to formulate a plan more than a plan itself. I know that a lot of the details are vague, and from the little understanding that I do have about the Middle East, details do matter. And so I absolutely agree with you. If 6 months, 9 months down the road, there's no shooting in Gaza, in Palestine, and Israel has pacified, then Europeans are going to look very stupid for recognizing Gaza and Palestine. If, on the other side, this peace plan proves elusive, then perhaps the perspective will be a little bit different. Time will give us a little bit of perspective, but I think that where you and I differ a little bit on this point is the likelihood that this plan will succeed.
Elusive in what way? Israel's going to stay on the edge, have a security cordon. There is money. There's now food and aid coming in. Hamas is going to be at least partially disarmed, possibly by force. What are they going to do? They've lost all their allies. That's basically the Gulf states, the Arab states, Egypt. Who's at the peace conference now? Every Arab state. Are they going to allow these maniacs to start another intifada? Or they just couldn't do it again. That's not going to happen again now that they know the threat. It's just, I'm not being Pollyanna. This is hard, if you want, almost Machiavellian analysis of the potential for mayhem on the part of Hamas is severely degraded. They have no allies. And all of the money that's going to come in is only going to come in if they are out of the way.
Bill, you're saying they have no allies, but help me understand this one. Qatar is the biggest supporter and founder of Hamas. All of a sudden, Qatar is becoming our ally, and we are promising security guarantees to Qatar.
Where is the largest U.S. military base in the Persian Gulf? Qatar, by far.
The strengthening of U.S. relationships with Qatar, what is that doing to Hamas?
Qatar is at this meeting. They have so much to gain. They were the push that made it possible. They and the other rich Arab states. they're not going to support these guys. They may not even allow them to stay, but if they stay, they're going to be in check.
So from what I'm getting, there's strong points about what's going to happen in Iran and the Middle East. Time will show over the next few years. Point number 4, also made it into the youth lineup, except for they titled it Global Turning of Backs on Israel. Slightly different wording, but related to the same point. So we're done with 4 global geopolitical events. Number 1, tariffs. Number 2, climate change and zero emissions. Number 3, the 3 big countries, China, Russia, and Canada. And then the 4th one came in also talking about the Middle East and peace in the Middle East. Those are the 4 key ones.
That's the most immediate. Or the other 5 are important, but they're going to be longer term. They'll play out longer term, beginning with the rearmament of the West. Is this really happening?
Point 5.
Yeah, the rearmament of the West. To a degree, it is real. I mean, already seeing it.
Additional
military buildup of the Western world, including Japan. Japan's also going to double in military spending. Japan's problem is they have no people, right? So you're going to have the first large military buildup in history.
Well, they have people that are very old.
Yeah, they're old, right? Personnel light military buildup technology. Yeah, in Europe, there has been a change in recognition, one that they need to. It was not something that they just one day woke up and realized. It was the U.S. basically saying, come on, guys, grow up. Adult countries defend themselves. You don't rely on the United States to take care of you all over the world and in your own backyard. And when all of a sudden, Ukraine is a European war. Why is the U.S. paying for this?
One of the things to all of this and to all countries, including the U.S., is we've had a prolonged period of peace, small conflicts here and there since World War II. This peace and reduced military spending has allowed the U.S. and the European countries amazing growth from the 90s to now in terms of GDP, economic prosperity, etc. So I think shifting from that mindset for everybody is difficult because being in the peacetime, being able to spend the money to grow schools, hospitals, cities was so important for the growth. And now to shift back into making weapon heads, etc., I understand what the point you're making. It makes sense. All I'm trying to say is that once you've had this winning horse for a while, it's very hard to jump off of it in a way. Until you're pushed, and Europe is very much being pushed.
Yeah. It's nice being a teenager or an adult and not having to get out on your own and make your own living and protect yourself. This is what Europe's been doing since the end of the Cold War. It's a fantasy world. Why should it continue? They've had this great welfare state paid for by the U.S. Why was the U.S. going after the Houthis in the Red Sea? We don't use the Suez Canal. And yet it was the U.S. Navy having to take the load.
But Bill, there is one interpretation here. You are characterizing this as a fundamentally unfair exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have never perceived the United States as being the protector of the world purely out of the goodness of our hearts. We've been trading off selling military defense to the rest of the world.
You don't know history, though. That's not true. Before World War II, that's exactly what we did. We're isolationist until it would just become untenable.
But after World War II, you had a higher level of military expenditure in the United States and effectively outsourcing military defense to the rest of the world. The inflow of money from the rest of the world into the United States, Lucas's paradox and the exorbitant privilege was effectively the result of the United States selling military defense to the rest of the world.
Come on.
You are characterizing it as a gift to the world. I personally believe that there was an element of exchange there.
All right. That certainly, it was not purely out of the goodness of the heart. But at the same time, it was not in America's best interest to take over the overwhelming burden of defending all Western interests all over the world. That's what we were doing.
Just from the bird's viewpoint. First of all, I want to understand better, what is this rearming going to be doing in Europe? Is it really the development of technologies for drones? Are we talking about chips development and drone development? Are we talking about automatic weapons? Are we talking about guns, rifles, tanks? So there's nuclear weapons. And then I don't really understand what does this rearming of the West mean. Is it a technological change in the West in terms of chip design, or is it something else?
Yes. It is all of those, except for nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are irrelevant. They haven't been used in 80 years. What is not irrelevant is all of the other stuff. By just raw numbers, China is vastly outproducing. There was a number that struck me. China produced warship tonnage equal to the Royal Navy in 4 years. So every 4 years, they produce a Royal Navy. They vastly outproduce. The U.S. is still a superior power technologically. But again, China's catching up. Germany. Yeah. What will happen? You'll have to get more people into the military, which is hard. Every rich country struggles with people becoming soldiers. They have better things to do. They'll find a way to do it, much more technologically advanced. So it'll be more people, which includes the pensions and healthcare for soldiers, more equipment, particularly artillery, tanks, drones. The best thing Europe could do would be to invest in Ukrainian military industries, which they're doing. This is where the best technology for drones is being produced in the world. They're underutilized. They have a large defense industry, but it's far lower than it could be with 10, 20 billion euros of investment. So they're doing that.
A lot on the technological side, you're saying.
A lot on the technological, but a lot of that is going to go through the U.S. If you're going to buy aircraft, you're going to buy an F-35. This is the most advanced weapon in the world. And you're locked into the U.S. military ecosystem for 30 years. None of this stuff works without the intelligence, surveillance, and space assets. You're locked into the U.S. ecosystem.
Can you update me on the F-35? I know the F-16, F-18. What is the F-35?
Different generation. These are stealth fighters. They're the largest military program in history. Technologically, much more advanced than anything China or Russia has, particularly China. The Ukrainians have beaten the Russian Air Force with almost no planes. They're scalable, built to be upgraded over time. They're a 30, 40-year asset, and several thousand have already been produced. So they're the key background of the U.S., all of the major allied countries. Finland now is repurposing its F-16s for F-35s. So you're buying into the most technologically advanced fighter plane, which will soon have drone companions.
I hope it's not produced by Boeing.
No, it's not. That's Lockheed Martin. Boeing's getting its mojo back, but it fell a long way. Militarily, U.S. exports 43% of all the arms. They're by far the leading exporter. 310 billion. That was the striking number.
I have to come back from my Boeing joke because I'm flying a lot these days and it's all Boeing planes.
They had a bad 2024. No question. They're going to be pushed out of the space business. SpaceX is absolutely dominant.
Okay, are we switching to the next point?
That's part of the rearmament of the West because a lot of the spending going to 5% includes pensions and things like that. So actual kit, hardware, and soldiers may be 4% of GDP. That's still a lot bigger than it is.
I haven't had a great performance when it comes to investments, but my best investment lately has been actually a European defense ETF.
Which one?
And Opsi. I don't remember, to be honest.
Best performance, Rheinmetall in Germany.
This is a defense ETF. I think Rheinmetall was 28% of the ETF.
It's tripled in the last year or something, the stock price. They're going to be winners, but you're not going to have the kind of welfare state that Europe's had. They've been free riding, and it's been fun. It's over.
I'm going to once more lodge an objection to the expression free riding, but we are going to have to agree to disagree on that one.
Get used to it. This is now currency of American politics. It's also true.
I subscribe to the view that the United States has been selling military protection. China has been offering trading partnership to the countries in the world. And at this point, that seems to be the big choice that every country that is choosing alignment has to make.
And if you had to choose, which of those two would you choose? Physical security or, come on.
Yeah. We have looked at the last 3 points, the last 3 geopolitical shifts outside of point number 1, tariffs, number 2, net zero emissions. The next 3 were related to different countries, China, Canada, Russia, the Middle East. And then finally, we came to Europe. So our discussion on the last 3 points have circled around countries. It's time to shift. What's point number 6?
The great fears haunting Europe now. There's 2 that I can see. One is going to be, of course, the U.S. is going to withdraw militarily. You're going to be defunct. The second is the rise of the populist right. Again, you get back to why is the reaction against immigration and climate policies? Europe is in a mess. Essentially, they're worried about military, but they're also worried about the rise of this populist right. These guys don't play nice.
I think that the rise in populism is definitely true throughout the globe. Historically, and as a variety of research points out, usually these spikes in populism follow periods of economic instability, problems, crises. So honestly, I think the world is still recovering from the 2008 financial crisis, because across the globe, we have seen the shift to the right after this crisis. Populism spikes after economic difficulties. I agree with Bill that, everywhere, including Europe, there's been a shift to the right.
Europe has had little growth, whereas China and the US are leaving them in the dust, economically, technologically, militarily, space, AI.
I thought there was an extremely interesting article in The Economist last week about the populist public debt loop.
I saw it.
I thought it was very interesting. This idea that large amounts of public debt create a drag on the economy, as Kate was pointing out.
Global debt issued by governments is now close to 100 trillion. US debt is about a third of that 100 trillion. So close to 35 trillion.
The US is growing much faster than almost any other major country except for India and China, much faster than Europe. The debt of the U.S. is sustainable unless it gets completely out of hand. I'm not arguing in favor of deficits. This is the world we live in. People don't want to pay taxes and they want services. That's not going to change. I don't think it's going to get any worse.
That's a tough equation to square. But I am again going to get us back on track. So we have covered again the most important geopolitical trends right now. The last three dealt with countries: China, Canada, Russia, Middle East, Iran, Israel, and Europe. Let's talk about the remaining major shifts occurring in the world.
State ownership, we've all done research on state ownership. It's making a comeback, but not in the way it used to. It used to be that it was state-owned enterprises and governments running companies, and that's still important, particularly in places like China. Very important. Mm-hmm. It's also a handicap, but there are benefits, and that's what China has done. State-owned enterprises are alive in China, less so in the rest of the world. What is really growing is state-owned investors, sovereign wealth fund, public pension funds, even central banks. I was surprised to see those numbers. It's $50 trillion. Those three collectively. The U.S. stock market is now well over half of the entire world. At one point last year, 60%.
A lot of money is tied up in the U.S. markets, basically.
Yeah, essentially, that's a lot of the state-owned money invests in U.S. equities indirectly because they can't make large. No foreign government investing is going to be tolerated in any society. But in terms of finance, they're investors. They're passive in general. Outside of their home country, they don't throw their weight around. They don't do politically motivated investing. It's important, but it's not central to what's happening. And it's not clear which direction it's going. The state-owned enterprises outside of oil, a very important exception, is declining. State-owned enterprises, except for China, and if China recovers, it'll stay important. But the entire increase in state-owned enterprise is from China. In terms of state-owned investors, this is becoming much more important. And it's becoming much more important in terms of where it really matters, which is U.S. private equity and European private equity and the funding of the way they invest their money in businesses. So this is going to be important. But this is long-term.
So you're saying government money invested in U.S. and in European private equity.
It's dominant.
And is funding startup growth in those countries.
Indirectly. Yes, it's invested in buyouts. Private equity does buyouts and venture capital. State-owned investors. They're the biggest investors, limited partners in private equity funds all over the world, particularly the U.S., but all over the world. They're also important as co-investors, and they become increasingly savvy. It used to be these were I used to call them big dumb capital. I almost never can resist saying that's not really true anymore. They become much more professional, much more savvy in how they do their investing. And I think on balance, they are positive. So it's an ongoing force. It's going to have an impact. It's not something to fear.
So you're saying that state ownership, state money, government money flowing into venture capital, private equity, which there's a lot of it, is nothing to be feared.
Because they're doing it as limited partners.
What about other channels like equity? So you're saying they're passive investors. As long as they're not running a company like a state-owned enterprise, as long as they just have a stake and remain passive, that is
Net capital injection into the system. And the recycling of petrodollars is really good. That's largely what surpluses for China.
What I've been thinking when you were talking about state ownership, specifically what we're seeing in the United States, under the Biden administration, we've seen a big expansion in what I would call industrial policy, especially with the CHIPS Act and the desire to target specific industries. But with the Trump administration, we've seen dismantling of parts of that industrial policy, but we've seen
new industrial policy.
The government take a 10% stake in Intel. Yeah. We've seen golden shares in US Steel. Are we at the doorsteps of a new industrial policy and a new role of state ownership in the United States? Or am I reading too much into few isolated breadcrumbs?
Yes, we are on a very small scale. The U.S. is a $25 trillion economy. All of those things tally up to maybe 50, 60 billion. The U.S. should not have a sovereign wealth fund. We're already building one now. Each of those stakes can be defended individually. It'd be nice if Intel recovered and became a real company again. The last one was on rare earth mining and refining in the U.S. It's going to be something of industrial policy. I've been a Republican my entire life. Trump is not my grandfather's Republican. This is not the Republican Party I came into. It used to be allergic to tariffs, government policy and intervention. This administration is happy to make investments, to take stakes in companies, whether that's altogether good, whether the tariffs are altogether good. I am now very much of two minds. So in industrial policy, instinctively, my reaction would be negative. The U.S. should not be investing in these. But there's always on the other hand. And I'm quite torn, frankly.
Okay, so point number 7 was state ownership and increase in global state ownership from a government investor perspective.
Right.
What's the next big geopolitical shift?
The space economy is about $650 billion, but a $105 trillion economy. It's not huge, but it looms massively in importance to technology and global competition. It's U.S. and China, U.S. versus China. U.S. is now far ahead.
We have another podcast with Bill on this topic. If our listeners are interested, you can listen. It's specifically about space economy.
Space economy is the satellite economy. Right now, we use space for communications, surveillance, television. You have about 10,000 satellites now. By some estimates, it'll be 100,000 by 2030, and maybe an underestimate. SpaceX is absolutely dominant. 90% of all the tonnage put into space last year was on SpaceX. That's gotten even higher this year. China's fading a bit. They were close, but they're fading a bit. Nobody else is in the run. Europe has been. It's China and the U.S. So satellites are the most important. What fundamentally drove the increase in space is this decline in cost. It used to cost over long periods up until 2011. It was $18,500 to put a kilogram into space. It's now $1,200, $1,400. And when the Starship, the new thing that SpaceX has, comes online, it may go down to $200. So 18,000 to 200. Whenever there's been this kind of a decrease in transportation cost, markets explode. The military aspect of space is where the real action is going on. 2/3 of global government spending on space, almost 2/3 is military. The U.S., it's about the same thing. This is where the really high-tech stuff is. The third one, and the one that I haven't seen anybody else mention, but throughout our lives, even mine, I'm older, much older than you guys, you've had mutually assured destruction between the U.S., first the Soviet Union, and China, that basically you held each other in mutual terror. We're now about to launch a Golden Dome missile defense system, and it looks like it's going to work. So what nobody has actually thought through is if it does work and all of a sudden the U.S. does not need to fear a retaliatory strike, diplomacy, politics, military balance, but nobody has mentioned the geopolitical implications of a successful Golden Dome. Look at Israel, basically.
So what I was going to ask, is this going to be a similar but larger scale of what Israel?
We're 41 times as large as Israel.
But this current war has shown that the Golden Dome in Israel also has its issues, right? So it's not 100% foolproof.
But it's highly effective. Iran launched 380, by far the largest ballistic missile attack in history last year. It killed one person, basically, a Palestinian in Israel. So it's all of the rest either were shut down or they can basically tell which ones are important. So it works. Now, the U.S. is going to be much bigger. It will be much harder to do, much more expensive, because when all is said and done, Israel's is a point defense. They protect a particular city or facility. To protect the entire continental United States, you're going to have a whole fleet of satellites, sensors, know when something is launched. That's the sensing part of it, and the technology and the networking and the computer that goes in that. Then you're going to have, if there is one, what are you going to do about it? Most of it will not be kinetic contact things, because that creates a lot of debris. So it'll be electronically or by laser, if this thing works. So what if North Korea or Iran develops a weapon? It's not clear that it would do a full-scale attack by Russia or China, but it could. So this is going to have major impact geopolitically, but also in terms of the technology that's going to be created for this. The technology spinoff from this is going to be absolutely massive.
So, excuse my ignorance here. So these golden domes also protect against nuclear weapons, I assume?
Yeah, it could. Those will be launched intercontinental ballistic missiles. Ballistic means you fire it off and then nothing else happens. The entire trajectory of an intercontinental ballistic missile is the launch until the rocket burns out. From that point on, it's just a rock. But all of them have missiles. Can be moved in flight, tracked, go up or down, move. So these are much harder to intercept.
I see.
But this would be able to do that as well. It would not defend against terrorists bringing in nuclear biological weapons
inside the country.
But in terms of an actual military missile attack, it could be very highly effective and likely to be.
So a lot of it is satellite dependent, but a big mission right now is military related.
Yeah, military, it's driving a lot of it. Going to the moon and Mars, we're going to do it. It makes no sense. There's political reasons. There's no economic reason to go to Mars or the moon. We've already been to the moon. It's driven by the egos of the world's richest men. And of course, governments are happy to tag along if somebody else is paying for it. But Jeff Bezos, Musk are paying for it in the US. China's paying for it for prestige reasons to try to get to the moon. But there's no reason to do this. There's nothing there. There's no market. There's no minerals that could not be done at far lower cost here. But we're doing it. We're going to go to Mars and we're going to go to the moon and we're going to set up bases there for no apparent reason.
I guess reputational reasons. And the value of reputation is difficult to measure.
Why did we go to the moon in the 60s? To beat the Russians. And now it's to beat the Chinese. Elon Musk has said many times he wants to die on Mars, not on impact. He wants to set up a colony there, actually live there.
Me and Veljko have had this discussion. I think this whole racing thing in terms of cars and rockets and going to all of this moon, I think it's a lot more male motivated.
Yeah,
I think women could care less about which car goes across the line first or gets to the moon, as long as there's resources.
Is it all saying that the difference between men and boys is the price of their toys? Very rich men have very expensive toys.
I can add more to that joke, but it's going to go the wrong way. So we've covered a lot. We just finished talking about space. What's the next big geopolitical shift?
AI is taking over the world.
AI did not make it into the top 5, neither on your list nor on the teenage list.
But I didn't think it was going to transform the world in 2025. I remember in the 90s, the internet was going to take over the world. It didn't. By the 2015s, it had. So the short-term impact of technology is usually overrated. The long-term impact of technology is almost always underrated. Last year, total spending worldwide on AI was a little less than $1 trillion. Huge increase. This year it'll be $1.5 trillion. Next year, $2 trillion.
The numbers are staggering. We have this paper called Rose.com by any other name, predicting the dot-com bubble. Basically, if you were a plumber and said that you were plumbing.com, the stock price of your company rose substantially. I feel like AI is definitely important. I also feel like we're in a bit of a Rose.com by any other name with so much investment going in. And how many of these companies will remain there remains questionable. And what tasks will AI take on?
Every technology growth in history. The first one in the industrial age was the railroads in England. Huge expansion, then bust. Same in the US, huge expansion, bust, consolidation, expansion, bust, consolidation. The internet. Look what happened there. It was this massive increase in the 1990s, much of which was just left in the ground, then picked up later. There will be a bust moment in AI. There's no question about it. Trees do not grow to the sky, right? You can't have this kind of growth indefinitely. There's going to be a reckoning, but then there's going to be continued growth. This is real. A doubling in trillions of dollars every 2 years.
If you had to express an opinion, is our current level of investment in AI net good for the economy? Let's say that's a 10. And is it net bad for economy? Let's say that's a 0. Are you more hopeful or are you more worried?
Superb 10, catastrophic 0, 8.
So you would describe yourself as a techno-optimist.
We would be in recession or very close if not for AI investment. And in terms of what it's going to do, there's a huge amount of money going into data centers, and that's going to have the impact. It's going to drive demand for construction of electric generating plants, and many things are going to be with construction. The real impact, if and when it happens, is going to be in productivity. That always takes a long time. The internet, computers took a long time to show up in the statistics because people have to learn how to use them. This will be the long-term payoff. The direct energy demand impact of AI is going to be massive because you're going to need a lot more electricity. But if that makes it so much more efficient, makes scheduling more efficient, makes deliveries much more efficient, makes scheduling of cars much more efficient, then you're going to have an offset in terms of efficiency. The net effect of AI is going to be overwhelmingly positive.
It sounds like the big effect is coming for just-in-time management and huge reduction in inventories.
Well, trade is 33 trillion. Manufacturing is 20 trillion. Think about transportation in the U.S. and around the world. Traffic is bad in the U.S., but in the Chinas and Indias,
it's a mayhem.
It's a parking lot, right? If you could make transportation more efficient, if you could have electricity generation that you didn't need to. Saudi Arabia has been increasing its electric generating capacity by 9% every year for the last 3 decades. Money doubles in 7 years, 9%, 8 years. Electric demand doubling every 8 years. This cannot continue, right? If you make things more efficient, transportation, delivery, scheduling, you would have a large payoff. But that's not going to happen immediately. The cost, the investment is going to be done now. The payoff is starting, and particularly in tech fields, already having a large impact. It will impact tech laggards like me much down the line. I'm something of a tech skeptic, but this is definitely real.
What worries me is the fact that so much capital expenditure is going to assets that depreciate rapidly, especially chips. They've expected lifespans of 5 years, but after 2 years, they're obsolete. It's plausible AI will be a successful technology and that still a lot of people are going to lose money on this level of investment.
How many people lost money in the tech bust? Every one of those bust, investors lose money. The survivors become Google, Facebook. This is what happens. These are consenting adults, right? This is not government spending. This is clear-eyed corporations with real investors making $100 billion capital decisions and the stock market applauding them for doing it. So certainly assessment by people who have real money on the line and real expertise is that this is working. Markets get euphoric. There will be a reckoning, decline, but the long-term trend is going to be inexorable and growing rapidly. And I hope we stay ahead.
So let's see what AI does globally. And Bill, you're saying you hope we stay ahead. You mean you hope that US stays ahead in AI?
China has shown is that we used to think that technology was going to be this democratizing, liberalizing effect. What China has shown is technology is really good for surveillance and an authoritarian state as well.
Right. And centralized planning, if there's a good scheduling, centralized planning becomes okay.
May make a comeback. I don't think it will, but it certainly could. It's just fun times to be alive. You guys have more years ahead of you than I do. This is great. The world, in almost any measure, basic health, standard of living, longevity, fewer people die violent deaths than ever before.
It is a super exciting time. Vaccinations have done a lot in terms of saving kids, and there's a lot less childhood mortality now, which has pushed our lifespans from 65 to 85. But also, I want to point out, from the user's perspective, while it's exciting time, right? When we talk about finance, we say risk is uncertainty, is a lot of volatility. So the way they think about it is as a return to instability. So exciting times is one way to say it, but unstable times is another way to say it. While I agree, perhaps for me and Veljko, for you, it is exciting. For those who are in their 20s, they are a bit worried to see all of this volatility, of all of this instability, all of these changes happening all together at once. So that's another side of this coin.
What instability? There's growth and decline, right?
Bill, the job market is changing in ways that are hard to predict. when you're 18,
This is bad. How?
the volatility makes it hard to plan. We have kids approaching college, and it's extremely hard to predict what the job market is going to look 10 years down the road by the time they're going to be done with undergraduate and graduate studies.
Which jobs I taken, basically. They're going to be professors still there.
Will the kids have better prospects than you had at their age?
No.
Unequivocally, yes.
I would not agree with that statement.
Oh, come on. The flip side of uncertainty means that there's also tremendous flexibility, and that if you have the right training and you have the right discipline and motivation, you will make more money and have much greater opportunities than any other generation before. They're going to have to be nimble. Yeah. And the idea that you start working for a corporation and stay there for 50 years died a long time ago. It's been a myth, but no. I'm on my 7th or 8th employer as an adult. I'm not going to move. My kids make so much more money. One doesn't even have a college education. You got to make $100,000 as a mechanic. If the 21st Amendment wasn't there and you could indenture yourself for the next 30 years for a lump sum payment today, how much would you be worth? 7 figures for any educated American kid. Your capital value as human capital is much better now than in the past and will continue to go up. Technology disrupts, but the economic impact of technology has always been hugely positive, and I think it will with AI.
But Bill, incomes at the top have been increasing in real terms, but incomes at the bottom have been decreasing.
They haven't been going as fast, but I understand what you're saying. There's no free lunch in economics. There's a point, and this goes to the heart of what's different between U.S. and Europe. You can have relative income equality. You can have much more egalitarian society. It's costly, but you can do it with aggressive taxing, redistributing income, providing public services. You can have a relatively egalitarian society.
You're talking about Europe.
Yeah, Europe, particularly France. It's immensely costly. The U.S. we have a welfare state, but certainly do not have punitive taxes on high ends. It's high, but not punitive taxes. Much less redistribution and much higher growth, but also much greater income inequality. Freedom and equality are natural enemies. There's no way you're going to reconcile that. And in democratic societies, that's why you have elections, is to make those calls on freedom versus equality.
Both Kate and I grew up in societies that were extremely left-leaning. And I think we have learned that the easiest way to make sure that everybody is the same height is to cut the heads of the tallest people. The joke in former Yugoslavia was that a politician noticed some people were driving Mercedes, some were driving Yugos, so they promised everybody equality. And of course, 10 years later, everybody's driving a Yugo, right? Yeah. I get your point. I agree. We live in volatile times, and volatility has an exciting, bright tail. I think that the people with the highest level of skill and the highest level of education can prosper right now in a way that has been unimaginable at any other point in our history. And yet I realize that volatility can be scary for some.
There's an economic measure for volatility, the VIX index, and it's been steadily going down. Your basic point that it's more volatile than it has been, I would disagree with. More volatile than when? The 73 oil crisis, global financial crisis, World War II, World War I, the Depression. When have we had this magical stability? We're closer now than ever. But the VIX index, which is the single best market index, has been essentially monotonically going down over time.
I get your point, and I guess in some sense, volatility perhaps was not the right expression, right? I guess what I meant is the pace at which the labor market is changing. When you and I were changing a college major, we had a much clearer and realistic assumption of what things were going to look like 5 to 10 years down the road. I remember the hot major when I started college was radiology. And by the time these kids were graduating from radiology, the market had been outsourced to India and remote work. That's the kind of disruption in the job market where you would choose a profession and 5 years later it didn't exist.
In the 1970s, worked as a chemist for 5 years, never thought I was going to be a finance professor. Things change, right? You take opportunity or go through recessions and change. There will be uncertainty. Essentially, there are two types of problems. Problems of growth and problems of decline. Problems of growth are more fun and can be handled, right? As long as you have economic growth, these things will not take care of themselves, but they are easier to address in periods where the boat is rising. We're certainly in that case in the US, in China, India, many countries. Europe, I'm not particularly sanguine about, but most of the world is doing well.
So we're getting to the last point. Let's talk
point.
about the last, perhaps the one with the longest lasting impacts, but it's just not going to happen immediately. We're not going to see it in 10 years and 20 years, but we will see it in 30 to 50 years.
The most important long-term impact is demographic. The United States and India are the only two major countries that are going to see populations increase slightly and then stay stable through 2100. China will be down by more than a third. China's already losing population. Japan's been losing population for 5 years. Europe is about to start losing population. This has all kinds of impact. One, there are fewer young people, right? So it becomes older as it becomes smaller, and older people are very expensive to support. So there's that.
But the US is also losing population. Without immigration, there's not a net growth in the US.
With a little thought, you can see it. The fertility rate is the average number of births per woman in a society. And with a little thought, that's got to be a bit over 2.05, 2.1 on average to have a stable population. And then as you're getting richer, populations get older, so you can have an increasing population even with stable birth rate. But when you reach equilibrium, that's population stability, 2.05. No country, no Western country, no big country actually has two or more. US is about 1.6, Japan is 1, China is 1.
Do you know the rates for Norway, Sweden, and the leaders of education?
Scandinavia is 1.4, 1.3, 1.4. The US has the highest of any Western country. It used to be very close to 2. No, it used to be. This has gone down in the last 10 years. Now, for the US, you have net migration. Now, this is going to be the first year in modern history where the U.S. has negative net migration. You have net out migration from running illegal alien or undocumented workers out. But in the longer term, the U.S. is going to have population growth because of immigration. The rest of the world, China, Asia particularly, is going to see very soon, they've already seen stable, declining populations. This is going to accelerate, and there's nothing they can do about it, right? It's very hard to turn around demographic changes because most are for very good reasons and very positive reasons. Why are you having, in the rich world, women having fewer babies? Because they can, right? They have rights, careers, education.
And of course, because it's so expensive to have babies. If it was cheaper, women would have a lot more. But childcare is very expensive. Think about college. Who can afford college in the United States? It's extremely expensive to have kids.
Except the countries, Scandinavia, Europe, that have good health childcare have 1.4, 1.5. Even that would help, but only arrest the decline. As you said, children, people want fewer later, and they become capital assets. You invest thousands or millions in.
Without guaranteed payoff.
Yeah, and the last thing a nice Chinese family wants to do is have their one son go off to war and be killed fighting for Taiwan. So this has real impact in the short term. Militarily, China is just going to become hollowed out. They're already having trouble recruiting, but think about a declining population. The fundamental point I'm making is for China, essentially, if they're going to launch an attack, they're going to have to do it pretty soon, within 5 to 10 years. Their demographics are simply not going to allow it, as well as the U.S. is rearming. If there's an attack on Taiwan, which is the great threat to world peace now, it's going to have to happen pretty soon, or else China simply will not have the military capability. They would already lose if they did it now, but there would be a chance. In 5 years, there's not going to be a chance. There would be no prospect of success for an attack on Taiwan after 5 years. So this is going to have an immediate impact in what it does to the strategic thinking in global politics.
So we are talking about this as a part of the depopulation, right? You're saying China has one-child policy, but going forward, they're going to lose half to a third of that. So there's going to be fewer people and even more prized lives.
With no social safety net. One person has to support their parents and grandparents. China is the first country to grow old before it grows rich. There's no one-child policy in China. That went away in 2012.
Right.
But there's been no bump. The expense in China is far greater to have a child than it is in the West, with much less rich population. Yeah, this is not going to turn around. Think about what that does for housing, right? China, we think of China as this manufacturing economy, and it is. But when all is said and done, before 2019, it was a real estate economy. 25% of the Chinese economy is real estate. And the way you basically built wealth is you bought an apartment. That has completely gone bust. If you have half as many young people in 20 years coming into homeownership age, and you already have an overbuilt housing stock.
That's why there's a real estate crisis there.
Now, the flip side of this, and the good side, is you're going to have a declining world population. In key countries, it's already happening. They're also going to be much richer. There's going to be an economic payoff for fewer people. Their income is going to go up. So you're going to have fewer people, but there's the GDP and the actual wealth of the society is going to continue to rise. So they'll create enough part of wealth to support the welfare state.
I've heard some of those arguments where fewer people, same assets, everybody's a little bit richer. And a shrinking population means wages are probably going to go up. And again, that means wealth. But on the other side, we have a lot of research showing that countries with a shrinking population, and shrinking comes hand in hand with aging usually, generally face declining GDP per capita.
How would that possibly be?
Because you have fixed costs spread across a smaller population. The biggest fixed cost right now is public debt.
And
you have fewer
healthcare.
People suspending public debt, aging population becomes less productive, and you have increased dependency ratios, right? Young people having to provide for their older folks. And I know that there is controversy in this literature, but most of the stuff that I've seen seems to support Comte, the French philosopher that said demography is destiny in the 19th century.
I was completely wrong. Malthus and the Malthusian.
The Malthusians were worried about population growth. I don't know of a single country that has been able to maintain GDP per capita levels and GDP growth in the face of a shrinking population. You look at Japan, they've stagnated.
It's fairly slow growth, but it is growth, and this is a very rich society. The richest part of the American population is guys my age.
Right now, but...
All right. We're in financial assets, we own homes.
Yeah, but the rest of the country is poorer because of it.
How can you say the U.S. is getting poor?
I didn't say the United States is getting poorer, but I do believe that as the population shrinks, we will get poorer. I'm looking at Italy, South Korea. Japan has been growing slowly. 30 years, the growth rate is zero.
Korea's growing. Italy, Europe has its own problems, but no, sure. Korea, even with a catastrophically low birth rate, they have a gender war. And many things about Korean society is very admirable, but their gender politics are toxic. But even it is growing. It's a powerhouse, economically growing.
I'm enjoying this debate, but I wanted to throw something completely random out there. We have covered our main trends. We've talked about all of them, and I'm going to ask Bill to summarize them in a moment. But I want to add one thing. This hasn't hit your list, Bill. This hasn't hit your list, Veljko. This hasn't hit the teenage list. But it has always been my number one in terms of geopolitical trends. I wanted to share that, perhaps because I'm a daughter of an infectious disease doctor. One of the biggest geopolitical threats right now is the risk of a global pandemic. COVID has shown us what it's capable of. It takes out the humans and leaves the assets. No golden dome can stop it. To me, the biggest geopolitical shift is the risk of infectious diseases and epidemic, and the risk of developing these viruses that can wipe huge amounts of population all at once.
Theoretically, you're certainly true. The ultimate example of the Black Death in Europe in the 1340s wiped out 40% of the population. And that was catastrophic at every level, but wages dramatically increased after. The Spanish flu during and after World War I, which had nothing to do with Spain. It was the only country that had a free press, and that's why it was labeled that way.
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, in terms of investment, I understand investment in AI. I understand investment in drones, investment in military. But I think one of the big military investments that we haven't talked about is the investment in infectious diseases. That is a weapon that can work a lot better than anything else, unfortunately.
It's clear now that probably the COVID virus came out of a lab in China. The evidence seems to support that.
It's accidentally escaped.
Surely accidentally. It's not clear they were building a weapon.
Scary recent effect.
Both the U.S. and Russia have forsworn development of biological weapons. But again, think about what happened in COVID. From a standing start, an effective vaccine in less than a year.
If that got out accidentally and not on time, imagine what can happen if a virus is fully developed and gets out.
I don't mean to belittle your point. This would be a catastrophic event. How would you pull it off? That's one of the reasons you have spy agencies, intelligence agencies, and scientific agencies are now, especially now, right? Everything we know, 9/11, we know October 7th. These are not going to happen again. What's the chances of a lab leak causing a pandemic now? Less than they were. I'm not Pollyanna. You're absolutely right. If you developed airborne...
Yeah, and it is going to be airborne, of course.
Yeah, a virus like that, it would have very damaging effects. And it wouldn't be China, it would be some third world country, but how would they get it? I don't mean to belittle it, Kate. This would be catastrophic. The anthrax, that was in a lab. That was probably American scientists that did that. So these are things you don't do in a backyard chemistry set.
I think that chemists are plentiful in all the countries we've listed. So I think that a big military spending should be infectious diseases. That was my point.
We were probably at bigger risk in the 70s and 80s. At the peak of the Cold War, with all the Russian research gone average.
That's true. You guys are 25 years younger than I am. I went through an entire generation where you were literally living with the threat of nuclear annihilation. With the Soviet Union, we are so much better off now. It's richer. The world is healthier. Absolute poverty will never be eradicated, but it has been dramatically reduced. By any objective metric, the world is a better place now. So I am an optimist. I always have been. I remain so.
I was going to ask to summarize. We've talked about a lot of interesting points today. Bill, would you list whatever comes in, whichever order things come to your head?
It's been a fun but rambling discussion, starting with the impact of tariffs, which have been dramatic, but not catastrophic. In fact, it was supposed to be inflation was going to surge because of tariffs, maybe half a fraction of a point. Once it hits equilibrium, it has not been the catastrophe expected, but it is a different era. The tariffs are going to stay with us for the foreseeable future. The second would be climate change. There's going to be an ongoing push for improved investment and environmental protection. This has been going on at least since 1965, Carson Spring, 1970 in the U.S. This will continue. But the world is not going to chase net zero because it's impossible. And it has a massive economic cost. China had already, if they said they were with it, they've already walked away. The U.S. has now walked away. In fact, is hostile to the entire agenda. With these two countries out of it, there's no way you can continue. And trying to will have very high political cost in many countries, very high economic cost. Environmental, it's going to continue to be important. We're not going to net zero. It will not happen. Paris Accords are defunct. Accords, why call it an accord rather than a treaty? There's no way a treaty could get through the U.S. Senate. A 2/3 vote in the Senate. They wouldn't get 1/3. It was never put to a vote, would never have passed. Almost history.
We're moving into the big country, Bob.
China, Canada, Russia. We'll know China within 2 weeks. They're going to have this major plenum. And if Xi Jinping is still standing, still has all his titles at the end of October, he won. It's basically the same situation we were in before. Taiwan's at risk. There's going to be this fierce competition with the U.S. in the West. Canada's going to play out over time. We'll know within a year or two if there's going to be a separation, much less statehood. If I had to bet, it's not going to go to statehood, the least likely option, but some kind of independence within Canada or as an independent state, perhaps with Quebec, they're also going to have a separation vote. It's a very real possibility. Ukraine and Russia, this cannot continue. You heard it said it's unsustainable for 3 years, and it's sustained, right? This could go on for a year, maybe longer, but it's very hard to see any path to victory for Russia now. They're just killing people for no reason. But they could continue as long as this monster's in power. This is the most ambiguous of the three. Time is on Ukraine's side. To say they're winning would be pushing it. They're no longer losing. There's no path for Russian victory.
We continue with countries.
All right. Middle East has been transformed just since I gave that first talk 2 weeks ago, right? You have peace in the Middle East, perhaps fragile. Anybody would not bet on enduring peace in the Middle East. There's too many things going on. But the chance of a large-scale insurrection or war is very low. There is a possibility of transformative investment, growth, a regeneration of Gaza. Where that's going to lead politically, I have a question. But people will stop dying. Guns will stop. Israel won. No other way you can put that. Those backing the Palestinian state, which was political theater, look foolish. This is going to... We have peace in the Middle East. American prestige has been enhanced. Israel has peace and supremacy. So there's a clear winner. A lot of people died, but there's been a clear winner. Iran is neutered. So Middle East has been transformed, certainly in 2 years, even in 2 weeks. The Middle East has been transformed. I think it's going to continue, and mostly positive. The capital, from a finance point of view, the amount of raw money in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, that is now all in for the U.S. When Trump first went there, but especially now, they're going to bring that kind of capital to Gaza. They're bringing that kind of capital to the U.S. The U.S. is going to have an industrial renaissance on a fairly large scale. Trump says $18 trillion of capital investment has been promised for the U.S. That's almost surely an overstatement.
I think this is interesting, but I don't know about the industrial revolution in the U.S. because I don't know who wants to work in factories. That's one. Two, we know money has no orders. That's the paper we learned about in your class. But I cannot refrain from saying that these are money coming from dirty hands. We have a paper about MBS killing a journalist. That's just one example. Yeah. That was just a visible one. I'm sure there's many other invisible ones. So I'm not sure if this is clean money. We frown on cartel money from heroin and crack. This is also not very clean money coming in.
I was a Saudi Aramco chair professor for 6 years. I understand that pretty well. There's going to be an industrial renaissance. It's happening. There's not going to be an employment renaissance in manufacturing. You're going to have these factories and data centers being built. There's not a person in sight. So there's going to be major capital investment, industrial expansion, output expansion. Employment impact will be positive, but minor. These are not blue-collar jobs anymore in manufacturing. I was first 5 years of my adult life working in heavy industry. You're going to have an industrial renaissance. It's occurring.
The data center driven ones, the tech driven.
It's not going to be an employment firestorm. Absolutely true. Thank you for pointing that out. Re-armament is the next one. The West it's real. How big it becomes is unclear. The net beneficiary of any Western rearmament by far is the United States. U.S. spends 37% of all the money in military. If the Western world starts increasing their military spending, it's also U.S. 43% of all the world's arms exports. So if they do rearm, they will rearm with U.S. weapons locked into the U.S. military ecosystem. The U.S. will be the economic beneficiary. It will make the Western world safer if Europe does start to pull its weight and rearm. Asia is much more fragile. Actually, there's no way Asian countries could stand against China without the U.S. The West is rearming. It will have an impact over time. State ownership is increasing because of sovereign wealth funds, public pension funds, central banks are investing. That is increasing. It's basically positive, or at least neutral. State-owned enterprises outside of China are not increasing and probably are still continuing to lose market share to private companies. One real outlier is oil, and that's because of national oil companies. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to change. That's going to remain largely in state hands. It's inefficient, but they're not good, but it's for political reasons, it's going to remain state hands. But generally, state ownership is not going away. AI is a huge force. Right now, it's expressing itself mostly in capital investment. It is transforming capital investment. There's a huge capital investment for AI. Some of that is displacing capital investment elsewhere in the American economy. So it's not completely a positive,
of course,
but it certainly is keeping the U.S. economy afloat and is creating tremendous technological potential. How fast and how positively that works out, only time will tell. It's certainly, on balance, a positive development. What's next?
Probably the space.
Space. This is what I've spent the last 2 years looking at. The space economy is growing. It will continue to grow much faster than the underlying economy. This is where cutting-edge technology is happening. Two things people should take away from the space economy today. 3/4 of it's private. So only 25% is government contracts. It's overwhelmingly satellites. 80% of the space economy is satellites. 75% is private. This is just mundane stuff, lifting heavy objects into low Earth orbit to have satellites going around for entertainment and communications, observation. This is very important from an economic and financial point of view. On the military side, this is where the real technological cutting edge is in the military, and particularly what will happen with the Golden Dome, which has been authorized. It's going to be built, and it very well might work. And if it did work, it could have major financial impact, but especially geopolitical impact in making the U.S. much less open to any kind of attack, particularly by a rogue state, but even by a major player.
We're on some of the last points.
The world population is still growing. It'll probably get to about 9.5 billion. It's over 8 billion now. So it will continue to grow for a while as populations become older. But once you hit an equilibrium age population, you're going to actually see, and some countries are already seeing declines. Japan's had it for 5 years. China's now having it for year on year, and it's will accelerate. The U.S. and India will continue growing for decades, but even they will soon, by the 21st century, will have smaller populations than they had.
I have to throw in two different growth paths, right? India, natural birth, U.S. immigration.
Yes, that's true. Even in developing countries, Asia, Africa, where you used to have 6 babies per woman, it's now 2.5. Even in the less developed part of Africa, it's not much more than 2 per mother. Latin America, these places where you used to have huge population growths, the same thing is happening there. They're not as far advanced, or they're not as low a birth rate as Western countries, but it's below 3. Demographics is destiny. So this is going to have the fundamental impact for the rest of this century. It's going to play out over time and impact the current world, mostly in how it impacts the future, particularly in terms of China. This is going to have the most impact in China, both because of what it's going to do to the housing stock and the value of real estate in China when you have a declining home ownership population, and they inherit from both of their parents the houses, and also what it does for military. They're already having struggles filling up the armies and navies of China. So this is going to have an impact on the military. And the flashpoint of the world is Taiwan.
Everybody alive. We grew up in a world in which China was by far the largest nation. And all of a sudden last year it flipped, right? All of a sudden India is larger. And I knew all of this intellectually. And yet only recently I've paused to actually look at world population projections. And by UN projections, by the end of the century, India is going to be just a tad larger than China, Europe, and the United States combined.
Wow.
In terms of population size. And that, to me, is just a mind-blowing statistic. And I thought it was very interesting to hear you give a slight different perspective. I am a little bit more worried about an aging and shrinking population and what that implies for our lifestyle. You have a brighter, more optimistic outlook.
Certainly, Japan is in real severe crisis. Europe has real problems. It's not an unalloyed negative. And the reason it's happening is overwhelmingly positive reasons. People are richer, women have rights, they have opportunities. Everything is better, particularly for women. Again, I'm not arguing with there's equality, but it's far better than it has been.
I know women live slightly longer than men, but the increase in longevity has been similar for both. Medical advances have worked equally.
The only exception to that, and it may have changed, but until recently, the one segment of the U.S. population that was absolutely declining, or the longevity was declining, was white males without college degrees.
Drug use, opioid epidemics.
Employment. So, that doesn't have anything to do with demographics, except if you really have the kind of AI boom that we could have. Where are they going to build this? They're not going to build it in New York City. They're going to build it in West Virginia.
The data centers. You're talking about the data centers.
Yeah, where they have land, water, connections, the Rust Belt.
So it'll create temporary jobs.
The construction will be temporary jobs. The other jobs will be there. Every manufacturing job creates 2 or 3 ancillary jobs.
I know there is one big established fact in the literature on population aging and the macroeconomy, and that's that aging populations come hand in hand with lower interest rates. Or at least that seems to have been the experience of Japan, of South Korea, of Italy. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think, what does that mean for us in the future? Lower interest rates, more sustainable debt, certainly.
There's a graph I used in class from The Economist. It was the real interest rates since the 1300s. For 700 years, they have been declining monotonically, almost completely monotonically to 2020. Now they've slightly bounced up, but the long run trend in real interest rates has been steadily downward as the world became more integrated, became more peaceful, or you had a dominant power. The murder rate in England is 1/100th what it was in the 1800s. The cities are so much safer, even with the crime we hear about. Life is longer, safer, richer, healthier than before in almost every society, unless you have actual war and chaos. The world is so much better off, by no means perfect, but certainly getting better.
I like this optimistic outlook. Usually, the funny thing is the old folks, I'm going to assign Veljko and I into that category, have this view of, things in the young generation are worse. They dress worse, listen to worse music. They don't do anything. They're a lot lazier.
Well, that's true, of course.
It's interesting to hear an optimistic perspective because I always felt like the older ones feel like the younger generation is doing enough.
The younger generation is going to hell and they're lazy. Yeah, but they have been since Roman times.
Of course.
Their kids will be the same. We'll survive somehow. 16-year-old males are a plague that we're just going to always have to live with. Somehow they survive.
Bill, this has been a fantastic conversation. Greatly enjoyed it. I think it would be great to have you back to talk a little bit and zoom in what this means for investors. So an open invitation to you for a follow-on.
When I started the PhD program in August 1982, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was at 775. It is now at 46,000. So over a 50-fold increase in the space of one career. It's going to keep going up.
I love the optimism.
I'm very pleased with it. All right, guys, this has been fun.
Thank you, Bill. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Ciao, guys.
Thank you.
For our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Send us your questions at questions@questionsinfinance.com.
Thank you for listening. If you like it, share it with your friends. This episode is especially opinionated, so we want to hear your comments.
Cheers.
Cheers.